Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, and welcome to @FamilyOffice, @FamilyOffice TV. And for old school podcasters or those that drive a lot, Angelo Robles podcast on Apple and Spotify and most of your other quote unquote favorite platforms. And a special shout out to my members of SFO Continuity that get a chance to interact live digitally in the moment. And most cases, not this one, we're opening this one up, have a chance to hear or watch weeks before I make part of my quote unquote interviews public. Today, it's a special day. It's 11/4, November 4th, not just because it's my birthday month, in case you're wondering. It's the day before the U.S. election in 2024. So we're going to call this, on the eve of the election, U.S. politics, stocks, gold, with Porter Stansberry. Porter is the founder of MarketWise, founder and CEO of Porter & Company. As America stands on the verge of a defining election, join me and Porter today for an unfiltered discussion of what lies ahead. We look to unpack real implications for markets, wealth, national stability, and talk about, no matter what, if Trump or Harris wins. Porter brings his controversial insights and decades of experience to break down why he believes we're heading for a seismic financial shift and what you need to do to prepare. Porter, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Welcome to the show.
I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Let's get right to it. If Trump wins, and maybe I'm being a little over the top here, could federal income taxes with the deep state go away, replaced by tariffs? Oh, I'm just getting started, Porter. Elon cleans up probably trillions of dollars in government waste, and the U.S. Strategic Reserve holds 1 million Bitcoins by 2028. Of course, by hodling, they go up to be worth millions and millions of dollars each. CPI stays below 2%. And why not add to it, a new American prosperity begins? Is that scenario realistic or even possible?
I don't believe it's realistic. I certainly share your enthusiasm for an outcome like that. I wouldn't say that it's impossible. I would just say that scenario would involve a sequence of things we have not seen in America since the early 1980s. And like I said, I'm hopeful, but that would, an awful lot of things would have to go exactly right for that scenario to play out. And in particular, I don't think that you could have that scenario without first having a really big economic shock, because however you decide to pay for the government, the reality is the spending has to come way, way down. We're on track to spend $5 trillion this year on transfer payments alone. And that, of course, is about double what we take in income taxes. And it's equal, or it's 92% of what the total federal revenue is. So there's not anything left over for defense, for interest, for paying back the debt. We're in a really tough bind. And if you look, just for an example, look at employment growth over the past 4 years. Virtually all of the employment growth in the United States has been government employees. Well,
you beat me to the punch of my next question.
Yeah, this is not the path to prosperity. The other thing that's really changed is in 1970, only 1% of the counties in the United States were dependent upon federal revenues, federal disbursements, federal transfer payments. Today, 53% of the counties in the United States receive more than 25% of all of their income directly from the federal government. In most places, America has become a socialist country. And there's going to be a shock. We need to get back to capitalism, but that entails a really big economic shock that I don't think people are at all prepared for.
No, and reality is, if Trump wasn't really perfectly telling the truth, by the way, you can't win. So you have to polish things up a little bit and then hope the government the leaders in our country has the stomach for it. Like I said, I wasn't kidding. You did beat me to the punch. I believe the approximate statistics are from September to October of this year, the U.S. federal government hired an additional 40,000 employees. This is hierarchy and bureaucracy. No matter what you think about Elon, I guess he's an imperfect person, aren't we all? To think that he wouldn't go in there and clean things up, but is the deep state. And actually, on that note, what is the deep state to you?
The deep state is the weaponization of the intelligence agencies to influence domestic politics. And I, unfortunately, have had a front row seat to this. There are some good old contacts of mine that exist at the highest levels and that nexus between Wall Street and the federal government. And these contacts of mine have been telling me since 2017 that there was an undeclared civil war going on inside the government, mostly between the CIA and the FBI, against anyone who was trying to restrain or stop the growth of government or the Democratic Party. And, my contacts told me that they were going to completely destroy Trump long before the Russiagate stuff started. So I think that it would be nice if someday that the truth of all that came out and the people who are responsible for those lies and for that propaganda had to suffer. But I'm not holding my breath for any of that. Likewise, I want everyone to know I am a very happy man. I'm newly married. I have a young child. I am not in any way, shape, or form going to kill myself.
If we know something happens where you disappear unusually or claim something, Porter, I'm going to be standing up for you. I understand. And by the way, I do not mean to be insensitive to millions of people that work in the government. Some of them are useful, and we do need some level of employment. I get it, in government agencies. And even Elon said, and by the way, I don't think the deep state's going to allow it. He might be able to make a dent, but I don't think he'll be able to do what he really wants to do because it's too entrenched. But there would be a severance and a package for people that would be short-term pain, basically for Americans, what you said earlier, for a long-term benefit. But the days of Americans willing to make sacrifices for the future appear to be gone. And on that note, I'm going to ask a very sensitive question. Do you fear that the day of the majority of voters one day will have no children? You have a kid or kids. I have kids. I have skin in the game. More and more people have no skin in the game. They care about them in the moment, tomorrow, maybe at most 1 year from now. Does this scare you?
Yeah, I would go a lot further on this topic. I have thought about this quite a bit. I think that democracy is a really good way of governing a nation of people that have a common language, a common history, a common culture, and that all agree into the very unwritten but most important rules of society. When we all have that in common, then we're going to use our common best judgment to make decisions for society that make sense. Well, what I think you have in America today is very much this you could call it class warfare, but you also just have a whole group of people that have very different values, that different language, that have a very foreign culture. And those groups have been very successfully organized in our society politically to extract benefits from other people. It is unconscionable that in America today, 1% of the population pays for half of the government. That's just extortion. There's nothing fair at all about it. And you're not going to have any of that change because there is so much benefits to be gained by organizing politically as opposed to organizing in the capital markets and having to do things to create value. It's just so obvious that in America, it's a lot easier to become a grifter and to join a political party and to get what you need in life that way than it is to try to make a new product or a service or work hard. And that's the antithesis of what made America great. And I don't know how we can restore that because it's so entrenched. I mean, where I live in Baltimore County. You cannot go to Baltimore City. Baltimore City is more dangerous than Beirut. The people who run Baltimore City have nothing in common with any of the people who built Baltimore City. They don't believe in the same things. They don't treat their families the same way. And the violence is just absolutely out of control. This weekend, we had a guy shooting an AK-47 walking down the street in Baltimore City. He paralyzed a young woman, 19-year-old woman, just sitting in her car. Had nothing to do with this tragic incident. But these things happen constantly. Last week, there was a 12-year-old in Baltimore who was arrested for aggravated assault with a gun. And it was his 5th arrest for that crime, and he was 12. We have to just start over. I mean, if you really want to fix these problems, and by the way, it's not just Baltimore, it's Philadelphia, it's Houston, it's Detroit, you know, all these places, it's New Orleans. These places and the way that they're run politically they should have no standing in America. Every single person involved in running that city should be fired.
What I will say about my own question with people not having kids, evolutionary biologists will be the first one to tell you the name of the game is mating, not survival. There is nothing that occurs without initially mating. 500 years ago.
I like mating.
Well, 500 years ago, I believe 1/3 of women died during childbirth or near the time of giving birth to a child. And the importance of mating and having birth was still so urgent and important, they still did it. And by the way, in case you're wondering, as I know I'm going to get some feedback, when I ask people from a more libertarian and conservative perspective to come on, then I'm going to grill them a little bit. It might even get a little uncomfortable. Most of the time, they're game to it. I look for people on the other side, and they often tell me no, because they're uncomfortable not getting a list of questions beforehand and having a filtered interview that they want to edit. So if any of you don't like that, maybe after the election,
let me just jump in.
Let me know.
Let me just jump in here about all this. Yes, I have 3 children, and yes, I believe having children is important, and I'm looking forward to having more. But it's also very important to spend time with your children. Right? There's no chance I miss my son's football games. There's no chance I don't talk to them every day after school. There's no chance I don't make dinner for them. There's no chance when they're little, I don't read to them every night when they go to bed. If you want to have children that end up being good children and sharing your values, you have to spend time with them. And the biggest mistake I see wealthy families make is they do not spend time with their own children.
100%.
And that is why these kids end up on drugs. They end up as failures. They end up as embarrassments. It's not because they aren't loved. It's not because they didn't have advantages. It's because the parents didn't spend any time with them.
I love it. So, I mean, I'm going to take it a little different perspective. Without a unifying morality, in my opinion, societies fall apart. And this goes to something that I believe it was Murray Rothbard that stated, why do people obey the government so blindly? People tend to enslave themselves, to let themselves be governed by tyrants, because it's easier to put faith in someone else to order the chaos in your life. Your life is your responsibility. We all have chaos. Face it head on.
Yeah, you know, the famous study that was done, I believe it was at Yale, the Milgram experiments. Show you exactly how readily people will torture one another if they're told to by someone in a lab coat. I mean, what did we see during COVID? Our entire society turned into a bunch of goddamn Nazis because somebody in a lab coat said, you can't come to work unless you take an experimental vaccine. And everybody jumped on that bandwagon. It was just disgusting and shameful. And that just shows you the real fundamental weakness that exists in our society. We are far too ready to believe what the tyrants tell us. My personal story about all that is my father. I never got to know him because they sent him to Vietnam in 1972, the year I was born. And, what a tragedy for him and my mother, the high school sweethearts. Their entire lives were wrecked, all because of a fucking lie. There was no chance that a civil war in Vietnam was ever going to play a role in our national security. Not ever, not for any reason. Meanwhile, we didn't even back the country that had the honest election. We backed the country that overthrew the rightfully elected leader. And no one in America knew anything about that. And it just goes on and on and on. So when you talk to me about the problems in our society, the problems in our government, these are big, deep issues. And it starts by finding out information for yourself and making your own decisions about this.
Absolutely. Thinking for yourself. I'm going to bring up a subject, Porter. Some will think it's a little bit too offhanded or not applicable. I actually think it is. And it's gained a massive amount of social media notoriety over the weekend. Peanut the squirrel was effectively the authorities, the government, came to this man's home and maybe he was breaking the guidelines a little bit. And to effectively force their way, my words, into his home, take his pet, kill his quote-unquote pet. I think it was actually 2. Now, the fear to me is not a squirrel dying, although I do think that is a little sad, as it was a pet. It's the issue of the government, the state, overstepping their boundaries. What's next? They don't like how I treat my dog. They didn't like how I'm raising my children. This starts a slippery slope that I do not like.
Of course. This stuff is just ridiculous. I mean, and by the way, you want to see a guy radicalize. You know, if my kids go in the city of Baltimore and they end up getting shot or hurt, I'm going to be very angry. But if somebody comes to my farm and shoots my dog, I'm going to shoot back.
When I'm in Wyoming, I feel the same way. But in Connecticut, I can't say that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, these animals are very important to people. I've had the same bird dog for 10 years now, and he's gone everywhere with me. And he is my right hand. I mean, he knows me very well. He reads my mind. And, you know, people get very attached to their pets. And it seems like the sanctity of your home means the government has no place at all. Now, obviously, if someone is mistreating animals, right? I mean, or if they've got a whole house full of pit bulls that keep biting the neighbors, there are obviously exceptions to this idea. But what happened to your house being your castle? And what happened to minding your own damn business?
Apparently a lot happened to it. And by the way, audience, long form interview, plenty to come up about gold, Bitcoin, investing, economics, global issues, wars. I just have a lot of topics and I'm a little rapid fire.
More important things to talk about than squirrels.
Well, although the big picture of what that leads to, I think actually is important. So approximately per the general population, I don't know, 49 to 53% of the people are going to vote Democratic for Harris tomorrow. The short answer is why.
Makes no sense.
Question.
I just think it's propaganda. If you look at the biggest hellholes we have in America, they're all places that have been led by Democrats for decades. If you look at who is trying to start World War III, it's the Democrats. If you look at who has censored people's speech for a decade, it's the Democrats. If you look at who used the government security apparatus to target their political opponents, that's the Democrats. I don't know how any reasonable American could vote for Kamala Harris. First of all, she didn't win any primaries.
Right.
She's not an elected representative of the people. And they lied to the Americans about the president's mental decline for months and months and months.
Obviously.
Yeah, by the way, I don't think that Trump is a sinecure. I do like that he's an actual business person as opposed to a lawyer or a politician. I like that about him. But man, his personal behavior is so abhorrent. I think everybody in America is like, where's Ronald Reagan? Can we please bring him back from the dead? Can we please have a gentleman who understands what the role of government should be in society, who wants to see it limited, who wants it to run on budget, and who wants to stay out of people's lives. But meanwhile, we can be proud of as a president because he looks and acts the part.
Porter, I completely agree. And for those of you that think we were being over the top to one side, I promise my next question was going to be, does Trump really have the moral character? Does he have the base of what he really talks about? He has flaws. And they're very obvious. When I'm asked by the wealthiest families in the world, generational issues with their children and grandchildren, and you hinted at it 10 minutes ago, it's spend time with your kids and grandkids, and foster a sense of personal morals and character that need to be taught. And I have to admit, Trump gets very gray in some of those areas. He's not my perfect candidate, but I have to look at what my options are, and I have to make a decision.
Yeah, I mean, I'd settle for Bill Clinton. he was one of the best presidents we ever had. He got in a couple stupid foreign adventures, which for some reason presidents seem unable to resist. Even Ronald Reagan and all the stuff, the idiotic stuff he did in Grenada and Nicaragua was, But I think the worst president we've had in my lifetime was the second George Bush. Guy was absolutely useless. So what you hear me saying is not about party politics. It's just about who can do a good job for the American people. Who's going to put government back in its place? Who's going to keep us out of war? Why in the hell do we have to spend so much money putting our troops all over the world? That's not going to make us popular with anybody.
No, that is most certainly for sure. I think I'm not the only one who said this, but I guess we all watched the movie Caddyshack. Is someone like Trump almost like the Dangerfield character where he steps on both toes, both those that are traditional so-called Republicans, Libertarians, and Democrats? He's very unique. Now, we could all make the argument that is it of some concern that basically everyone that was in his cabinet appears to be against him this time? What would be your response to that?
I think it's great. I think that the people he had in his cabinet last time were all big government, big state people. And I think he's learned not to trust them. So I'm very excited about the people that Trump has surrounded himself with. I mean, I think it's going to be great if you have people who actually know what they're doing in various industries who are advising the government on how to improve its performance. And we need a massively smaller government because we cannot afford the promises we have currently made. And that's just a black and white numbers issue. Look at what's happened to M1 during this administration. So it's gone from 4 trillion to 20 trillion. And Kamala is still telling people during the football games last night that it's the grocery store's fault. I mean, that is so pathetic. I said on X, formerly Twitter, I said, is Kamala that stupid, or does she think we're that stupid? And I don't think the American people are that stupid. I think they have seen the absolute gross incompetence of this administration, and I'm very confident that they're going to kick the bums out. And if I'm wrong about that, then we've got a really big problem.
Now, Porter, if I could let's go with the word pushback a little bit. So I think I'm asking fair and balanced questions. I'm an imperfect person. Yes, I skew to being libertarian a little bit to the right. But on social issues, I probably consider myself more open-minded and so-called maybe old school liberal. But here's a little bit of a point. Could I make this? Stocks are at an all-time high. Home prices, good or bad, at an all-time high. Gold, all-time high. Bitcoin, all-time high. I think a big issue, you mentioned the jobs report, that could be a little misleading, and the debt. The national debt is an issue. But before you answer it, and I know COVID was unique, we do have to admit Trump was a great contributor to it as well.
Absolutely. I think that, I think Trump was very badly misled by the entire medical industrial complex. And I think I think they used that panic. You remember the guys, the researchers in London who were saying that you were going to have bodies stacking up in the subways and all this stuff? They said that there was going to be hundreds of millions of people that would be dead by next Tuesday. And, Trump, either to his credit or to his, detriment, believed those lies and, rescinded a whole category of personal liberties, which I definitely don't forgive him for. I mean, he was the most tyrannical president we've had since Abraham Lincoln. And that's not the way that Americans should ever be treated. Your health is your responsibility, not mine. And I definitely, I never, ever want to see our country do those kinds of lockdowns ever again for any reason. It's completely antithetical to what it means to be an American. So no, I don't think that Trump is a perfect candidate, and I don't think he has a perfect track record. What I have seen him do consistently is be willing to learn from those mistakes, to address them openly and honestly. And that is something I have never seen the Democrats do, not once.
The average 30-year fixed rate mortgage is now back again above 7%, according to Mortgage News Daily. That's almost 100 basis points bump up from effectively when the Fed cut rates by 50 basis points back in September. What does that tell you?
You made a point earlier about how everything is at indexed high levels. And what I want to point out is something much more important, especially for wealthy people. What's happened in our economy over the past 30 years is the hollowing out of America. We have been inflating away all of the gains to productivity so that real wages have not increased in about 50 years. And that has led to the middle class to being very much harmed. It is not possible in America today to get a high school education, to go get a good job, and to be a member of the middle class. To do that, you have to have two adults working, which is very bad for the family, very bad for the birth rate, very bad for our country. And that is purely because of inflation. If you print enough money, you can make stocks go up. If you print enough money, you can make bonds go up. If you print enough money, you can keep interest rates down for some period of time. But you and I both know where all that ends. And it ends with the destruction of the middle class. It ends with the destruction of the social contract between the people and the government. It ends in riots. It ends in strikes. It ends in war. And we are on track for all of those things. If you look at the stock market in terms of gold, it hasn't gone anywhere in 20 years. And if you look at it in terms of sound money, aka Bitcoin, it's gotten destroyed. We do not have a fair society. We do not have a fair economy. We have a society and an economy that favors the elite, both in corporations and in governments. That is why 10 companies now make up almost 40% of the S&P 500. That is not smart. That is very risky. And likewise, the S&P being at 28 times earnings, that's because people are fleeing the inflation, not because they believe in the likelihood of those earnings to grow.
Yeah, that's actually a great comment. We're going to get to some of that relatively shortly. But staying on the theme of economics as well, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink and notable other investors, Druckenmiller, Paul Tudor Jones, making the case for higher bond yields and obviously higher inflation and debt concerns ahead. Are you basically on board with their thesis?
I'm way ahead of them. I cannot imagine how any fiduciary would ever buy a treasury bond from the U.S. government. The U.S. government is no question absolutely bankrupt. They're spending 100% of tax receipts on direct transfer payments, and they're having to borrow all the money they need to make the interest payments on our debt. Meanwhile, our debts are now going up at $1 trillion every 100 days. The government is completely bankrupt, and we are on the verge of a hyperinflation. And that is exactly what you're seeing from gold. It's exactly what you're seeing from Bitcoin. And it's exactly what you're seeing from that small cohort of public company equity that is best able to manage inflationary pressures.
Well, I mean, that brings up a little bit of a comment. Then I want you to comment on one of your posts, I believe, the last couple of days, which was startling. First of all, greater embedded inflation in the world than we've ever seen. You could definitely make that point. I believe you wrote this weekend, maybe it was Friday, something to the effect of, effectively, what is the best way to get rich in America today? Selling the dollar short. And I believe you gave a pretty long on X synopsis of Michael Saylor, of MicroStrategy, what they're doing in Bitcoin, and why that kind of is intriguing.
Yeah, let me be clear about this. Michael Saylor is a friend of mine, and my company, my research firm, Stansberry Research, has covered his business for a decade, and we think very highly of him. He is a genius, every bit as much of a genius as Elon Musk is. And what Michael Saylor figured out is something that we had been working on as well, which is the logical conclusion to a government where you have 1% of the people paying for everything, and they're going to lose every election. And the people are going to continue to vote themselves more and more benefits that cannot be financed. And you're going to end up in a hyperinflation. We're on the cusp of that right now. And Michael Saylor figured out that the very best bet to make is to leverage the dollar by borrowing it at fixed rates and buying Bitcoin. And he's done that with tens of billions of dollars. And he and his company are the very best performing business in the entire country over the last 4 years. And so I'll ask all of you who are watching this, bravo to Michael Saylor, and bravo, he has saved his shareholders. He has done his job as a fiduciary. But what does that say about our country when the most brilliant mind in the country, who is delivering the most amount of economic benefits for his constituents, is in the business of shorting America? This is how absolutely backwards our country has become. And this will not last. You cannot continue to run the government this way and the country this way. It will absolutely disintegrate. And people think I'm crazy for saying this, but I think you're crazy to not see it. We are heading into a civil war. 53% of the counties in the United States depend utterly on the federal transfer spending. The federal transfer spending cannot go on without triggering a hyperinflation. So how are you going to tell half the people in the country that they're going to have to starve? It's not going to go well.
When I looked at the opportunity in voting, and many of you think that I would just automatically lean one way or the other. By the way, I'm not embarrassed to admit, and part of it was my uniqueness in terms of being mixed, meaning half minority, being Hispanic. I did vote for Obama once. I have voted in the 90s for Clinton. Actually, my voting record in presidential candidacies is ballpark about 50-50. And I was open-minded to actually shocking, but being open-minded relative to Harris. There's two things that, well, multiple, but two that really stood out as a grave concern and a lack of economic knowledge. One would be the price controls that she spoke about relative to food. Now, that's different than price gouging during hurricanes, tornadoes. I would agree with that. But broadly speaking, price controls and the threat, and I know it's not going to happen right now, but the threat of taxing unrealized capital gains, when you really think through it from an economic perspective, and God knows what condition we may be in 10 years from now, where who knows if that becomes a reality. But those were two things that made it almost a definite no. And yes, in case you're wondering, I thought about sitting tomorrow out, by the way.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable choice that you could make. And I don't know how to fix these problems. The one thing that occurs to me that would fix all of these political problems overnight is a very simple and equitable solution where you simply say, bring your 1040 or your 1099 or whatever your tax statement is to the polling place, and we'll give you as many votes as you paid in taxes this year. If you do that, then you're going to start running the country the same way you run a corporation, which is you get as many votes as you own shares. You have equity in the country because you've paid taxes, then you get to have a say. If you don't have equity in the country because you don't pay taxes, then you don't. And if you want to be a wealthy person and shelter all your income by borrowing money against securities and doing all the tricks that the friendly people at UBS will teach you how to do, great. Then you don't get to vote. Fine. I mean, by the way, I'd be happy to give up the right to vote if they would stop taxing half of my wealth every year.
I would say for me, and again, I promise you, as recently as 2 months ago, I was ready just to say, this is very frustrating. I'm going to sit it out. Those two comments definitely didn't help from me going in the other direction. And I would argue, I look at some of the people this time, I hope, that Trump is bringing on the team. I admit I'm a bit of an Elon fanboy. Elon, RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, Vivek, who of course I disagree with him on some things, but that man debating in a very cordial manner, very intellectual, is probably the best I've ever seen. Yep. And I've been a little more impressed than I originally was about JD Vance. In other words, I simply think the team appears to be the better option, even if I may not be the biggest advocate of Trump.
Yep, I agree with all of that. I have been really impressed with Vivek and with JD Vance, and I think that cast of characters brings some hope to the Republican Party as well. because I think those people are the kind of Republicans that I grew up identifying with. My uncle, by the way, was a long-term, lifelong best friend and business partner with Howard Baker. And sure. Howard Baker, you may remember, was the Senate Majority Leader in the 1980s. He was also co-chairman of the Watergate Committee in the early 1970s. And he was a Republican, but he was a very moderate Republican who was well-liked by both sides. And he was a statesman. He was capable of explaining what's good for the country, and that's what we're going to do. And I really feel that way about J.D. Vance. I think that these people, they have very sensible ideas about how to run the government in a way that's acceptable to all Americans. And man, just look at the craziness that has erupted in our society over the last 4 years. What in the world? Can you imagine, seriously, can you imagine if our parents saw the world that we have created, where you have men boxing women in the Olympics? What in the world has happened to our society? What in the world's happened to our society where you have a situation like Baltimore? I mean, it's just unthinkable that this is happening in America. Why are we sending $25 billion or whatever we've sent to Ukraine when it's not safe to walk down the street in one of our country's largest cities? What are we doing? And we got to have some sanity. We got to have a government that's willing to live within its means. And we got to have a government that starts doing what's best for the country instead of what's best for some politician's career or their political party.
Porter, what does Warren Buffett know that apparently, I guess, we collectively don't?
What's Buffett know?
Yes.
Oh, Buffett sees all this very clearly. He understands that none of this aggregate demand is sustainable because it's all a product of government spending, and government spending is now completely powered by inflation. This rate of economic activity cannot be maintained. We will destroy our currency if we keep doing this. And so you're going to have higher interest rates. You're going to have much less economic growth for a period of time. And Buffett sees all of that. He also, of course, sees that stocks have never been more highly valued. And I believe, and by the way, you can, if you think that my ideas about the likelihood of a civil war are extreme, I think that you're going to see Bank of America collapse in the next 6 months. I think you're going to have
my next question again.
Yeah, we are going to have a major banking crisis. There is no way that we can continue to ignore $500 billion of losses that exist on the balance sheets of the banks. None more so than Bank of America. Look, folks, if you don't want to hear this, that's fine. But this is just math. Okay? The very worst trade in the entire history of the capital markets was when Brian Moynihan spent almost $700 billion of other people's money buying what I call COVID bonds. This happened in July of 2020. It's a matter of public record. I'm not making this up. He put an enormous amount of money into long duration bonds that were yielding about 1%. This is the dumbest thing that's happened since the British banking industry bought the British war debt in 1932. They also got wiped out. So how in the world, if you have inflation running at 4% by the end of this year, how does Bank of America keep its deposits when right now it's offering 0.04%? And we know it cannot afford to offer more because it has no interest rate spread already. And it's just crazy. Bank of America is paying 3.3% to foreigners for foreign deposits, and they're not paying anything to Americans. Well, sooner or later, the customers of the bank are going to go, what the hell's going on? Why am I losing all my money to inflation by keeping it in Bank of America? I'm going to take it out. I'm going to go to a different bank. I'm going to go to a money market mutual fund. There will be a run on Bank of America because it is the worst run bank in the country. And the CEO has been a disaster. Meanwhile, they've paid him more than $100 million since that trade was put on because they haven't had to mark the losses from that trade against the bonuses that he's been paid. It's an absolute crime. And if you go back and you look at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting from not this year, but the year before, they put up two signs, one in front of Buffett, one in front of Munger. And it said, held to maturity, available for sale. And what that was an inside joke telling the bank, knock it off with your phony accounting, fix the issue with these bonds. Of course, the bank didn't. And now Berkshire has sold every share of Bank of America they owned. And that was Buffett's third largest all-time investment. He's completely liquidated that. He's also sold most of his Apple stock, and he's raised the largest cash position of any corporation in American history. If that doesn't tell you that we've got bad things ahead, then you're just not paying attention. There's not much more I can do to help you.
Let's talk a little bit about the dollar as the almighty quote unquote global reserve. But already global transactions compared to 5 years ago are down. They're about 70% now. For the first time in what feels to be a long time, maybe some competition from BRICS, depending on if they're going to back it with gold and commodities. And the BRICS appear to be greatly expanding beyond the traditional Brazil, Russia, etc. So I guess it's inevitable. Nothing lasts forever. But do you think the dollar is on its last legs? And really, are the BRICS in the next year, 5 years, going to replace it?
Yeah. So I've been writing about this since 2011. The thesis I wrote back then was called The End of America. And I wrote it because of the way we handled the banking crisis going back to the collapse of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. When we began to finance our bailout by buying our own bonds with our own currency, when we began to monetize the debts of the banking system, we converted a whole bunch of private losses into public losses. We socialized all of those bad mortgages. And in the process, we began a cycle of inflation that we know from history cannot stop. If you go all the way back in American history to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the very first time we experimented with paper money was the winter of 1695. The Massachusetts Bay Colony thought it'd be fun to go up and raid Quebec and take a bunch of stuff from the French-Canadian traders up there. Unfortunately, they got their asses beat, and they limped back to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, 5,000 people who were tired, injured, and hungry. And the leaders of the colony were facing a mutiny. So what do? They printed up a bunch of paper, and they said, this is legal tender. We will never print any more of it, we promise. And everyone has to accept this currency this winter. Meanwhile, we're going to get on a boat, and we're going to go to the king in England, and we're going to get the gold that we need to back it, and we'll be back in the spring. Well, you know what happened next. They didn't get any gold. They kept printing money, and by 1720 or so, there was so much inflation in the colonies that the King of England passed a law against paper money. And that tradition made it all the way into our Constitution, where the dollar was legally a weight of silver. And so we have a long history of failed experiments with paper money. And there's no question that when you begin to monetize your debt, this is what happens. And every collapse is met with still more paper. And each time it's 10 times more than last time. And this is exactly how you get to Zimbabwe. This is exactly how you get to the collapse of Weimar Germany. This is basic economics, and it's so ridiculous that we have to continue learning these lessons. But America is on that path, and we have not done anything to get off of it. And the two choices are, you either have to have a very tough deflationary collapse where you establish a new monetary standard, or you're going to have a hyperinflation. And as you know, the politicians are always in favor of printing more money and spending it. So that's what's going to happen.
Okay, but still that potentially leaves, could I make the argument with our massive deficit, the one thing that we're hanging on to a little bit is because the world effectively settles in dollars, that gives us some level of control or kicking the can down the road. Inevitably, again, what did I say earlier? Nothing lasts forever. Is that 1 year, 5 years, 50 years, 100 years? I'm not sure. I don't know, if not the BRICS and or partially backed by commodities, could you see the World Bank or an entity creating an SDR, a basket of oil, gold, commodities? What do you think could knock the dollar off its perch?
Where have you been? Bitcoin's already done all that. And by the way, why would I rather go live in El Salvador right now than live in Baltimore? Well, it's safe. They put all the damn gang members in jail, and they have real currency. They've got Bitcoin. And Malay's about to do that in Argentina, too. I would not be surprised if over the next 50 years, Argentina becomes the wealthiest country the world has ever seen. If you want to have a successful country, you have to have freedom, you have to have free markets, and you have to have sound money. America's decided to abandon all of that, and we're going to end up as a shithole country. And it's already happened in many places in our country. And the reasons are obvious and simple to see. And by the way, the gig is up for the dollar. If you look and you see how many central banks have been buying gold and more and more and more every year, it's right in front of your face. The gig is up. If you're still holding dollars, you're a goddamn moron. The world cannot make it any more plain that it does not want our toilet paper over money anymore.
If I could push back a little bit, could I make the point the U.S. is a wonderful country and has contract law, it has a powerful military, the Mississippi River gives it amazing farming, oil, natural resources.
No question.
We have an edge and have an advantage. I went to Europe a couple of months ago. I've been to LATAM. I've been around the world. And of course, architecture, great food, wonderful people. They do not have the entrepreneurial spirit that Americans have, the uniqueness that makes us collectively from different cultures around the world, a unique society around a commonality of morals and certain standards. Therefore, okay, we're a limited giant, even a one-eyed giant, but I don't see, maybe Argentina, you said in 50 years, what is going to replace us? I just don't see it at the moment.
Listen, there's no question that America should be infinitely wealthier. And there's no question that if we just did a couple simple changes to have sound money, to have low taxes, and to have real freedom, that we would be infinitely wealthier. But look who has gotten rich over the last 50 years, far richer than us. It's Singapore, it's Hong Kong, it's Ireland. It's everywhere that has sound money, small government, and freedom. And we're no longer the leaders in that space. We're getting our asses kicked by lots of people around the world. I'm just telling you, if you haven't been, go to Ireland, go to Singapore. You won't believe the standard of living in these places. Meanwhile, there is not a single public school student in the city of Baltimore who reads on grade level. Not one. And we spend $28,000 a year on that hellhole of a school system. What do you think that 500,000 people who are so uneducated that they can't read, what do you think they're going to do for their lives? We've got a large portion of Americans who are utterly unprepared to live in the modern world. And all they're going to do is just create enormous social problems for us. And we're completely out of our minds. We will not address these issues. And instead, what are we doing? We're taxing the rich. We're giving out money to the poor like Robin Hood, and we're bankrupting ourselves in the process. And there's not one single wealthy person I know that's not actively looking to get out of America. That's true. And you know that if you talk to your family office people, if you've got at least $100 million, you're looking to get out of this country. You're not looking to invest in it.
That's true, I think, and I actually have experience in that subject. I did my biggest masterclass ever was sovereign risk and disaster preparedness. And I absolutely agree that we have issues and challenges. Every country you mentioned is relatively small, homogenous, and by the way, are effectively a zero in military. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran could wipe them off the earth if it wasn't for, I don't think, their moral character.
Oh, yeah? You think so? You think anybody could wipe Ireland off the map? The Romans tried, didn't work. The British tried, didn't work.
Nuclear weapons.
Ain't nobody getting rid of the damn Irish. And those people who think that they're going to allow that immigration to occur, they're fucking wrong. You're going to see a real civil war in Ireland, just like you do every 50 years when somebody tries to fuck with those people. Leave the Irish alone.
Now, Porter, again, I'm going to push back a little bit. Besides my nuclear war comment, those countries, including the U.S., actually including practically everywhere on Earth, populations, what did I say earlier about mating? They're declining. In Japan, supposedly it'll disappear in 700 years.
Listen, this is something that I've written about for 25 years. I'm writing a book called Warren Buffett's Mistakes. And I think you can learn a lot from people by looking at their mistakes. There's no question that Buffett's a genius. No question that Elon Musk is a genius. But everybody makes mistakes. And when you see a genius making a mistake, you can learn a lot from it. The biggest mistake that Buffett ever made was that he genuinely believed in the risk of overpopulation. He believed it so much that him and his charity bankrolled abortion clinics all over the United States. And those abortion clinics, by the way, have created a Holocaust for Black Americans, a Holocaust. The Black American population should be double what it is today, but they've had something like 20 million abortions in the last 25 years. I mean, it's just crazy, what they've done. I'm not talking about your right to an abortion. I'm saying that as a culture, as a people, this is suicide. So I've never, ever believed that population was a risk to any society. Population is critical to economic growth and wealth, critical. But I think that there's a giant difference between an American who worked hard, saved, and immigrated here. And by the way, I married an immigrant. My wife worked very hard to come to America. I'm completely in favor of immigration. We need talented people from all over the world to build a better nation. No question about that. But there's a gigantic difference between the Cubans who fought to get to Florida, after Fidel Castro, and the idea of emptying the jails in Venezuela and flying the people here to swing states. Those people are pawns in a political game. They're not the people who are yearning to come to America and work hard. And I hope that, of course, I hope the best for them. I hope they're able to integrate, and I hope they're able to help us build a better country. I don't wish ill on anyone. But what you've seen happen with immigration, both in Europe and in America, I think is much more likely to be a cause of conflict, not a resolution to growth.
Back a little bit to the U.S. election. So it's going to come down to probably ballpark 7 or 8 states. So the amount of money in both candidates going into for probably to swing 500,000 to 1 million votes is actually a little sickening. You have the blue wall states, you have Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada, and obviously probably the big one, Pennsylvania. Really, the simplicity of my question, tomorrow, and I guess we'll know a couple of days later, who do you think is going to win, and how would that make you prepare no matter which candidate wins?
I think that Trump is going to win at an unprecedented landslide. I have never in my lifetime, I have not seen a political candidate as unpopular broadly as Kamala Harris is.
The Democrats have the advantage of simply there's more registered Democrats than Republicans. Now, yes, concentrated big cities, it's an electoral college. I get it. But to have a Republican landslide victory, we probably have to go back, to 84 and Reagan, meaning it's harder for them to quote unquote do it. You feel from your constituency, your subscribers, your audience, it is going to be that much of a landslide?
Yeah, I do. Listen, I get paid to look at math. I can analyze a business for you. It's not hard for me to look at banks and insurance companies and other things like that and tell you if they're being well run or poorly run. I'm not really a political analyst, but I have never seen the Republican base be as energized as I see it with Trump. And I have never seen the Democratic base be as dispirited as I have seen it with Kamala. I think the Democrats just simply embarrass themselves. And I don't think even their staunchest supporters are very proud of what's happened.
And again, just playing a little bit of the other side because your opinions, I think, are going to be valuable to my audience. When I first heard the tariffs idea, I kind of thought it was stupid. And then I reconsidered it, doing some research, and I'm like, I don't know, but interesting. But there was something written by someone on the other side, Adam Posen, The True Dangers of Trump's Economic Plan. He argues, I'll briefly read, Trump's unilateral vision could harm the economy due to increased tariffs, mass deportations, and a push to control the Federal Reserve, impacting inflation, consumer strain, and economic destabilization. I would assume you would disagree, and I think you already gave your main points for doing so. But what did you think about what I read? Broadly, if you knew it, his comments, and how you would react to them.
I think that tariffs are a very dangerous way of funding the government.
Okay.
And I think that overall the issue is not the government funding. If you study economics, you'll learn there's an absolute truism. There is no kind of tax policy that can generate more than about 20% of GDP in tax revenue. And the reason why is very simple to understand if you understand human nature. If you tax people more than about that overall rate, they just stop working. There's a reason why the Soviet Union failed. And you cannot generate more tax revenue than about 20% of GDP. So right now, government spending is 38% of GDP. We've got about 100% more government than we can afford. And the question is not how to raise taxes to pay for it, because we can't. We're already raising as much money in tax revenue as we can. If you raise taxes further, you'll just have people quit working, quit paying, leave the country, etc. Taxes are already super steeply progressive, and they're as much as we can afford. So whether Kamala wins or Trump wins, you have to have a major reduction to government spending, or else we're going to have a hyperinflation. There's just no way around it. If you try to fund it with tariffs, the risk is that you're going to greatly increase the cost of living, because trade enables the most amount of wealth creation, because it enables the most amount of specialization of labor. There's a reason why we don't grow bananas in the United States. That's because it's way easier to grow them in Costa Rica. And when you have trade, you get all the advantages of that comparative advantage, which, by the way, is the earliest and most important concept in economics. And every economist in the world, right or left, understands that the entire basis of wealth is comparative advantage and specialization of labor. So if you start taxing that, you're gonna really, really have a very, very painful and inefficient way of raising resources. The very best way to raise taxes on any economy is a simple, flat sales tax. If everybody had to pay the same that, then they would vote for less government because they get tired of paying for it. The very worst way to raise revenue for an economy, the very worst way, is through tariffs. And the second worst way is by taxes on capital. If you tax capital, you're not going to have capital formation. You're not going to have capital investment. You're not going to have economic growth. So these are all things that every single economist already knows. They're basics of ABC of reality. Why our politicians have such a hard time admitting these truths and explaining it to the American people, I got no idea.
Let's assume that Trump wins and Elon is involved. And again, I think because of what may be perceived as deep state, they're not going to be able to make massive cuts. Maybe they make a dent. We're still going to have a $36 trillion plus deficit. It's over $1 trillion of interest payments on that, which exceed our defense budget. Like, to potentially make an impact on that, there's going to have to be pain before there's pleasure. But in voting every 4 years, how is he or any candidate going to be able to address that?
You're going to have to be honest with the American people. We're living beyond our means.
Is that going to work?
Honestly, I really don't care, because if they're not honest with the American people, it's going to be even easier for me to get wealthy, just as it has been for the last decade. All I'm going to have to do is borrow money and fixed interest rates and buy Bitcoin, and I will get unbelievably rich. Just do that. And if the people don't want to be told the truth, they don't want to be sold down the river, then they're going to have to live within their means. This is just basic economics. It really has very little to do with right or left. That both sides of our country have run our finances in a terrible, terrible way. You can't borrow $1 trillion every 100 days and expect to survive. It's not going to work.
I think we all would basically agree with that. Just how to get it done appears to be a bit of a challenge.
And one little thing, I want people to understand something. There is a doom loop that has already begun.
Right.
Because all of these transfer payments, which now make up 75% of all government expenditures, they're all indexed to inflation. And you don't think of it this way, but our interest expense is also indexed to inflation. So we keep spending more and more, and then we keep printing to pay for it. And that cycle is going to get out of control. So something is going to have to give. And the only way to avoid a hyperinflation over the next decade is going to be by cutting government spending by about 50%. That's going to have huge ramifications on the economy, on corporate earnings, on everything. We're going to have to learn to live within our means, or we're going to suffer a catastrophe.
Porter, I would say looking back 30 plus years ago, and I'm older than you, but I was young and growing up. I would say the right, quote unquote, was the party leading after the Reagan era in power, and deep state skewing to them, and quote unquote, any party that tends to get an advantage tend to going to be squeeze it tighter and tighter to their benefit. So negative things that I may be saying about the deep state now being more democratic, I would say the same thing, and I did, even when I was younger, relative to when the right was more in power. My bigger picture question, as pendulums do shift, I look at universities, I look at big tech, I look at Hollywood, I look at traditional media. I might, shockingly, even look at Wall Street and say, they went far left, and there's been a little swing back, a little bit more to the center. Is this the way the world works? The party in power just wants to stay in power, no matter who they are.
These are questions I can't answer. None of this stuff makes any sense to me. I can't understand it. There's things about politics that just don't make sense to me. I just really, truly don't get it. I don't understand why, as a political strategy, it's so difficult to tell the truth. I guess it's just because like any other kind of advertising, no one tells you the chocolate cake's going to give you diabetes. They just tell you that it's soft and delicious and chocolatey. And so I guess that's the way they win elections, and that's what they have to do to stay in power. So that's what they do. But it's just so nonsensical. It really is. It's just Looney Tunes what our country does from time to time. We don't talk about this enough, but you brought up something about nuclear war earlier, and I want to tell you something about nuclear war that I don't think anyone really recognizes yet. You can't actually use nuclear weapons. It's not because you can't fire them. It's not because you can't kill millions of people. Politicians do stuff like that all the time. It's because using them will poison the entire world. So if you did something like, detonated 50 nuclear warheads on Russia, you would spray plutonium all over the entire world, and you would poison the entire earth. And by the way, this is not my opinion. This is fact. You look at what happened to all of Western Europe because of Chernobyl. Well, that's not even one nuclear warhead going off. You can't use nuclear weapons for the same reason why you can't use biologic weapons, because you end up killing your own people. So the nuclear weapons are completely a myth. They are totally a product of the deep state. We built 71,000 nuclear weapons that we can never, ever use. And in doing so, we spent about $15 trillion from the 1950s until today. And they did that by telling the American people that the Soviet Union was going to destroy us or threaten us. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union didn't even have a single aircraft carrier. They couldn't even feed their own troops. They had to import grain from us to feed their army. And yet we're spending all this money to build nuclear weapons that we can't even use. These are the kind of things that our government has done and will continue to do unless we have some kind of check on their power. We need a return to sanity. And it starts with just saying to them, you can't spend money that you didn't collect in taxes. Why is it so difficult to have a balanced budget amendment? Every state in the country lives within a balanced budget except for DC. Why?
Why is the question. On a completely other subject, I did tell you that I bounce around. Are we seeing an other tech bubble?
I don't think so. I've done a lot of work on parallel computing, and it is a massive and important change. I actually don't think so. I think you're going to see that the earnings that keep flowing into NVIDIA and keep flowing into the entire parallel processing transformation is going to continue for a very long time. We have existed on one type of computer architecture since the 1950s, and we are now building a much more capable kind of architecture. But that's going to require a whole lot of hardware and a whole lot of software and a whole lot of rewiring the world. But it's going to work a whole lot better. So I'm actually very excited about the gains in productivity and efficiency that are going to come from the parallel processing revolution.
Well, that would be very interesting and could make a positive impact in the US because the Mag 7 is obviously companies US centric. I'm probably a little off on this, but I think I heard somewhere that every trillion-dollar company on earth effectively has initial or close to initial roots in California. Yes, I know Facebook was originally founded in Greater Boston, but you get the big picture. And Saudi Aramco started initially with at least corporate offices in San Francisco. Is that part of the American spirit? As much as we may kick California a little bit for often what we deem to be stupid politics, is there something in the air of entrepreneurship, of tech, that is driving all of these gigantic companies, NVIDIA and others that you mentioned?
Yeah, it's just wealth. There's more concentrated wealth in the San Francisco Bay Area than anywhere else in the world by a wide margin. And if you look and see what they have built out there, starting with Apple Computer, with Genentech, with these incredible businesses that were in the 1980s with Amgen. I mean, these are revolutionary technologies that are creating the modern world around us. And they all happened in the same roughly, 50 square mile area. So there's just an enormous concentration of wealth there. And it's been great for the entire world.
And back to your other comment, Porter, old school, more traditional value investors are going to state, I don't know, like what is Angelo and Porter talking about? NVIDIA, the Mag 7, the PEs don't make sense. I'm a value investor. I'm going to look beyond that on quarter to quarter growth. I'm going to look at the world is changing. Metrics need to be different. I'm going to look at supply and demand in a given market infrastructure. I'm more on your side, but I did a podcast where I spoke about investments in NVIDIA, in Meta, in Alphabet. Do you think that a family office should have exposure to those kind of hardcore growth stocks beyond nominal, possibly as much as 15 to 20% of their portfolio?
Absolutely. I was talking about Warren Buffett's mistakes, and his biggest mistake was avoiding technology. There's been no more important source of wealth in the world over the last 50 years than technology. And I think that if you do not have a technological expert as a part of your analytical team, you're making a huge mistake. I have worked with some fantastic tech analysts in my career. David Lashmet is an absolute genius. And he has brought to us more than 30 different businesses that have gone up more than 1,000%. Currently, I'm working with a guy named Erez Kalir, who used to be Julian Robertson's personal money manager. Julian Robertson, of course, is the founder of Tiger Management, very famous hedge fund firm. And Erez, has a degree in microbiology from Stanford. He has a JD from Yale, and he was a Rhodes Scholar. And he has spent his whole career understanding the revolution going on in biotechnology. So he's covering that for my team now. These are incredibly important businesses. And what the wonderful thing about them is you have an opportunity as an investor, if you're willing to study the fundamentals, to get in on a business model where you have a tenfold improvement over what current standard of care is or current technology. I mean, the NVIDIA processor is not 10% better than the Intel processor. It's 10,000 times better. And so it's very easy for you to make those bets. All you have to have is the technical understanding required to know where there's a tenfold improvement, and there's no stopping it. So I think in a lot of ways, investing in revolutionary tech is easier than investing in, say, a good insurance company or something, because the differences in the businesses are much less nuanced.
Now, yes, I admit in what I described in the short term, could it potentially be more volatile? Sure. But if I'm a family office with tens, hundreds, or billions, or $100+ billion, the advantage I potentially have is patient capital and to see things through and have enough cash reserves where short-term needs could be met if markets are down. We may come back to that a little bit later, although I know we're effectively heading to the home stretch. Why are private equity giants effectively selling in record amounts?
Why are private equity giants selling in record amounts? I don't know. I honestly, I don't really cover many private equity firms, so that's a question I just can't answer.
Sure. What would be your take?
I just don't have much insight into that. I've always been in public equity. That's always been my playground.
Okay, and we're going to definitely bounce back to that. Trust me. If what you say is true, Trump wins, and it plays out the way you think it could, what is going to be the impact in the relatively short term, 3 to 12 months, on interest rates?
Did you hear about the big bond trader who died last week?
No.
Well, he apparently made it to heaven. It was a miracle. Most bond traders don't go to heaven, but he got to heaven, and he was a little surprised. He's like, why'd you let me in? And God said, well, I was wondering if you could tell me what you think interest rates would be in 6 months. You have to explain the joke. It wasn't very funny.
No, yes, I get it. Basically, who the hell knows? There's so many moving parts that's putting a crystal ball to work. If you're a longer term investor, you're maybe not looking to be as tactical from that perspective.
I can tell you this: if I'm running a family office of $100 million, I have zero exposure to anything longer than 3-year paper in denominated in US dollar. Zero. I have no exposure.
Okay, Porter, let's stay on that theme a little bit. If I'm a typical $300 million family office, relatively a tightly controlled family, not too big, and I'm looking more longer term, 5, 10, 15, 20 years out, I need to have some liquidity in cash that I don't want to wake up one day and the portfolio is down 40% in stocks. That might happen.
Well, I would have a full allocation in cash right now. If we talk about how to build a perfect portfolio for the world we live in, it's real simple. There's 4 buckets. You need to have exposure to equities because you've got to have growth. Okay? And how do you hedge your equities? You hedge your equities with cash. So right now, stocks are at all-time highs. I would have a full 25% exposure to cash. Wow. Cash for me is durations less than 3 years. So you can buy SHY if you want to just put it on one ETF. It's short duration paper. You're not going to lose any money. The yields on that are going to be around 4%. They're going to just cover inflation. It's just cash. Great. So you're hedged. And by the way, you're expecting for stocks to roll over at some point soon. So you can then allocate the cash back into more equity. Okay. So you do have inflation risk though. So you hedge your cash with gold. And if you don't want to do gold, you can do gold streamers like Franco-Nevada, always a good choice. You can also include some Bitcoin in there if you believe like I do that it's superior to gold. But you want to have 25% more or less in something, gold, silver, Bitcoin, that's impervious to inflation. And then you would normally have an allocation into bonds as well. And you could see that you could if you want to think of it this way, that your equities are being hedged by your cash, and your bond portfolio is being hedged by your gold and your precious metals. And that's a great way to think of it. So 25% would normally be into bonds. I don't think you can safely own bonds right now. I think they're uninvestable. Not when the Treasury is out of control, not when they've shown you for the last 10 years they're going to print money. So it's uninvestable. So what I would do instead is I would own really well-run insurance companies. Because what insurance companies are, and by the way, not talking about life insurance, talking about property and casualty insurance. So this is a really good underwriter on top of a big pile of bonds that are actively managed. And so a guy like W.R. Berkeley has been managing bond portfolios since his Harvard dorm room in the early 1970s. And he's going to do a much better job as a bond investor than you can. So just let him. Just buy W.R. Berkeley. And by the way, if you've had a big allocation to Berkshire over the years, that's another way of doing it, of course. I don't believe that Berkshire is investable right now. They've got huge problems in their railroad. They've got huge problems in their power company, and they've got huge problems in their insurance company. You're going to be much better off, instead of owning Berkshire, just owning half Apple and half Progressive, because Progressive is kicking Geico's ass up and down the block right now. So that's a great replacement for Berkshire if you, like me, are a little unsure about what's going on with Berkshire these days.
Do you think that family office level investors, I mean, it's kind of been proven, investing in a broad index, which are liquid, your extremely low fees, compared to long short managers and other 2 and 20 structures where you're more tied up. In the 90s, early 2000s, you might have got some arbitrage with incredibly talented managers with an edge. Now it's getting harder and harder. I know you're not as much into venture capital and private equity. Venture capital's been a bit challenged. Private equity's done well. But I've always argued, and it may be different for the $10 billion plus family office, I get it, that there is tremendous opportunities in the public markets, even in today's market. Volatile, yes, but if you have a long-term time perspective, and I get asked, could I get so-called venture capital-like returns in the public markets? I did a program last week where I showed you absolutely could. Is it more volatile? Yes. So your perspective, do sometimes larger investors and family offices look, I don't know if I'd say the easy way out, but let's buy Big Blue. Let's give it to a 2 and 20 structure. I'm not going to get fired. It's not my money. No skin in the game. Let me get 6-7% a year and not be too volatile and be happy. Are they wrong? Is it understandable? Or might they be more tactical?
Man, how many managers have beat the triple Qs in over the last 20 years?
Probably 3 to 5% net of fees.
Almost none. It's just, to me, I do recommend individual stocks. I do try to beat the market in my newsletters, and my audited returns suggest that I've done pretty well. But for most people, I think that having 80% of your equity allocation into the S&P or into the triple Qs is a no-brainer. It's very difficult to beat those indexes, especially given the tax efficiency of owning them through the ETFs.
I don't disagree, but the opportunity of course, we all think we're smarter than the next person, and there's a level of excitement in quote unquote in the stock market. But I'm glad you said that, and may create some opportunities for us to have a future follow-up. We're probably going to end within 10.
I also just say, I really do believe it's very important that you remain an investor. So let's say you've got $100 million. Okay, great. You've got 25 million of it in insurance companies that are well run. You're going to earn 12 to 14% a year over time in that portfolio. That's great. You've got cash, which you're not going to earn anything on, but you're going to smooth out the cycles by investing in equities when they're cheap and by harvesting equities and then when they get expensive. And then you've got, unfortunately, you have to hedge the dollar. So you're in gold, you're in Bitcoin. That's great. And you've done very well with that this year, but some years that'll be flat and some years that'll be down. And then you've got equities, which is really where you generate future wealth. And if you own, let's say you own half the Qs and half S&P, you own a bunch of great businesses and you're diversified. You could also do something, I really like the quality ETFs. There's Moat and there's QUAL, quality. I can't remember the sponsors, but they just do a real simple quality screen. So it's not just market cap weighted, it's market cap weighted with an emphasis on quality businesses. Makes a lot of sense to me. And then of course you've got capital. So you're getting paid dividends. There's money moving in and out of that portfolio all the time. So then what I would do is I'd read somebody like Dave Lashmet, like Porter Stansberry, like Erez Kalir, and when they come out with a really great new opportunity in business, then you can take a bet on something for 3 to 5 years. Okay, this is going to produce outsized returns. This thing is so much likely to outperform. I'm willing to take a bet on this particular business. And I think if you're not willing to bet on individual businesses, you're missing out on huge important opportunity. There are things that are world changing. There are things that go 10 to 1. And if you spend a little bit of time reading and thinking, you can find them.
I completely agree. I believe it's you, Porter. I might be wrong. And we didn't even get into energy, oil, although I probably have an indirect question coming up. I believe you're a huge advocate of the company Exxon. Is it still the case, and why?
No, I'm not a huge advocate of Exxon, actually. Exxon is one of the greatest businesses ever in the history of capitalism. I'm not suggesting that you're not own Exxon. I just don't think you're going to have market-beating returns in that business. It's too capital intensive, and there is too much innovation moving away from oil. I actually think you're going to do much better with nuclear power and with natural gas. So I've been a big proponent of a business called BWXT, which is the leading provider of nuclear facilities to the U.S. Armed Forces, and they're going to be leaders in the small modular reactor space. Over the next 30 years, nuclear power is going to have an enormous renaissance. And to get us there, we're going to need to use a lot of natural gas. So I'm also a big proponent of a business called EQT. The story of the Rice brothers and EQT is one of the greatest American business success stories ever. And it happened just in the last 20 years. These three brothers took over, they built a private oil and gas company called Rice Oil and Gas. And then they took over a large antiquated public company, EQT, which was one of the first city gas companies. It's the gas company of Pittsburgh. And they ended up buying the largest portion of the Marcellus Shale from Chevron for about $800 million in the middle of the COVID panic. That was an $8 billion asset they bought for $735 million. And in the process, they became the world's leading producer of natural gas. So they produce more natural gas even than Qatar. And they're a private company. And they're, of course, expanding into LNG, and they own a pipeline to export it. They're going to be an enormous integrated natural gas company, and they're going to be the first new fully integrated energy company in America probably in the last 50 years. They're really doing some incredible things.
We're getting a fair amount of questions piling in from families. We'll go a little bit rapid fire. I don't believe as much your bailiwick, but they ask, so I'll ask it. For a family office, are you an advocate of a part of their portfolio being placed in private credit?
Again, I want to be really careful not to talk about things I don't understand. My asset management firm, Stansberry Asset Management, has a private credit fund. And I know we've done a great job with it. And I know people really like it. And I think it's delivering cash yields of in excess of 14%. So it's certainly a much better alternative than buying treasury bonds. But I think so much depends, of course, on what you mean when you say private credit. You know, who's doing the underwriting? What are the assets backed by? All those things are super important to understand, as well as all the fees.
And it may be a similar answer on the next one, but I have to ask it. And families are noting, Angelo, family offices usually anchored in the core alternative of real estate. I find it very geographic centric. If you have an edge, I think it's wonderful. It comes with advantages and arguably disadvantages. Would you recommend for maybe a typical family office investor that is not experienced in real estate, either to co-invest with another family or simply go in the public markets like a REIT?
Yeah, here's something that you don't hear very often. I think real estate's a terrible asset class, and I wouldn't recommend owning any of it.
Why?
Well, it has very low return on assets. You end up making all your money from leverage. And that's just very dangerous. It's not something that I would do if I was managing permanent wealth. I seek to own very little real estate personally. I don't think it's a very good business. And I think it is not commonly appreciated how risky it is. Although all of a sudden now people are waking up to that reality.
Yes, I think I gave a couple of days ago, if you purchased real estate 15 years ago for $500,000, and admittingly, I'm not throwing in the leverage and all that, just a straight $500,000, and now it was worth $2.5 million, that does sound pretty amazing. Kudos to you. But if you put that into the SPY or especially the triple Q in that same time frame, you'd actually have more than that. And I don't think.
Let me give you an even better example.
Sure.
I have been recommending as one of my top 10 stock picks since 2007. I want people to recognize I bought this because I knew we were entering a residential mortgage crisis. I shorted Fannie and Freddie. I wrote about it for years. It's one of the most important things I ever did in my career. And yet I told people, go buy shares of NVR. NVR is a national home builder. And back in 2007, they were the only national home builder that didn't own any real estate at all. So when people ask me, should I invest in real estate? I'd say, well, you know what? I invested in NVR because it didn't own any real estate. That's how I think about investing in real estate. And if you go and look at that stock, it is one of the best performing stocks of the last 40 years, outperforming all of the tech stocks. I think in the last 20 years, it's up about 10,000%. And again, it's a real estate company that doesn't own any real estate. And that's how I feel about being a real estate investor.
Porter, I think I got about 4 rapid fire questions left, and we'll wrap it up. Uh, and I'm going to go a little off topic, then back to investments. In your view, how effective is, if at all, the IMF in promoting global financial stability, and what improvements can be made, if any?
Oof. Boy, that's it. We could spend a whole afternoon on that. I think the IMF is one of the great crimes ever committed on the world, and I think they should just blow it up. It's a shame what we have done to our trading partners and our friends around the world through that entity. It's ridiculous. We loan them our paper money, which then they buy all their stuff from us, and then which we foreclose. The IMF has graced Argentina 26 times in the last 50 years and has greatly impoverished that country. And everybody involved in that institution should be ashamed of themselves.
When I have on macro thinkers, economists, and others, it's what almost always gets different answers is, what is an inflation hedge? In reality, we could look at different blocks of time, 1, 5, even 10 years, and it's one thing, but not another. Some say gold, some say silver, some say farmland. In theory, depending on what I'm looking at, they might be right. Could I be a little different and contrarian, Porter, and say that stocks are actually...
Oh, absolutely.
That's the real inflation hedge. You just got to give it sometimes 10 years.
It's not. People really ignore what an important role equity plays in asset protection. People say to me, "Oh, I'm going to own lots of gold because I'm afraid of the dollar." Well, how'd that work in 1933? All the gold got seized. And by the way, I don't know what will happen, but I would not be at all surprised to see that the government makes Bitcoin against the law. I don't know how they're going to seize Bitcoin because you can hide it so easily, but I can imagine that they're going to attack it because it's so competitive with their paper money. So, but the thing that won't get seized is, no one's going to seize Exxon from the shareholders. No one's going to take your stocks away from you. That's just not going to happen. Likewise, they're not going to seize farmland. They're not going to seize timberland. I think having a mix of real assets is important, but I think equity should definitely play a role in all of your asset protection thinking.
And for my little comment, especially for $1 billion plus families, basically concurring with Porter, at that level, I would look at physical ownership of gold in and out of the banking system and out of country. And yes, I would look at unique structuring, ownership, and storage of fine art, but a subject for perhaps a little different time.
For big families, also one of the very best. I just said I don't invest in real estate. So I'm contradicting myself here. But one of the nice things is you're allowed to own foreign real estate, and you don't have to report that anywhere. You do not legally have to report a foreign real estate asset, and so that's another good asset protection hedge.
Porter, is the price of Bitcoin, silver, gold, is it suppressed, artificially suppressed, and why?
I've had people say these things about silver for years and years and years and years. And again, it's just something I don't know. I'm not involved in the trading of silver that way. I am very good personal friends with Vance, who's one of the largest coin dealers in the entire world. He invented the professional coin grading system, PCGS, which is, I think everyone agrees, it's the highest standard in grading coins. So Van and I have talked a lot about the difference between the gold price and the price of gold. And there's definitely shenanigans that go on and the price of paper gold versus the price of physical gold. But I can't explain why. It could be normal market dynamics. It could certainly be somebody trying to game the markets. I don't know. As far as Bitcoin goes, I've been pretty successful in Bitcoin by figuring out what the average cost of production of Bitcoin is. It depends on the hash rate. It also depends on your energy source. But I try not to buy Bitcoin when it's above what I believe the average cost to mine is. And so for me right now, that's about $55,000 a coin. And obviously Bitcoin is much higher than that right now. So I wouldn't personally be a buyer of Bitcoin today, but I have been a buyer of Bitcoin for many years. And I definitely think it is superior to gold in every way.
And Porter, I promise we're almost there. Some guests don't like the question, and it's okay if you want to pass on it. One got actually very annoyed. If you could have a dinner party with one historical figure in the world of finance, who would it be?
JP Morgan.
Why?
Because, he was there at the very beginning of our country's economy. He was there at the beginning of the dollar, the beginning of the global financial system. He saw everything under the sun. And he also famously said, I would never sell short America. And it's funny to see that, that was our greatest financier in the early 1900s. Our greatest financier today is the guy who shorted America most successfully. I think that says a lot about the problems of our country and where we are today.
And I'll get your opinion in case you're writing, talking about it, and investing in it. GLP-1 drugs, weight loss drugs are beyond trendy, doing very well. I look at that play, a biotech play, the future, how AI is going to enhance things. Do you look at a company like Lilly and others as being good investments?
Yeah, I'm really proud to say that we got into GLP-1 drugs in 2016 because of the work of an analyst I just was mentioning, David Lashmet, who has just done incredible things for us in that space. A big thing that Dave is working on right now is he is convinced that the low Earth orbiting satellite revolution is just getting started, and he thinks that that Globalstar and Apple are going to beat Starlink to the first cell phone system that's completely satellite driven. So there's just lots of opportunities in technology. It's a great space for people who have patient capital. And I would encourage everybody to get a good tech analyst, or if you need one, come see me at Porter & Company. We have some great tech analysts.
I mean, some of the things that you mentioned, from AI advancements in deep tech, what I would call deep space to a degree, what you describe now, GLP-1s, I completely agree. These are all things a little bit on the cutting edge that I've been active talking about with family offices. And family offices could sometimes be very conservative, very careful. When I spoke about Bitcoin 5 or 6 years ago, the vast majority of them thought I was crazy. I'm not sure if they were not correct about that, but I think allocating a portion initially to get more comfortable on your thesis in a variety of the things that we're speaking about today. And again, think for yourself and form your own thesis. If you don't mind, you mentioned a stock that ironically was more of a indirect real estate play, and some people are asking if you could repeat that stock again.
Sure. It's the home builder. It's NVR.
Okay. And besides that one, if you don't mind, and I know you're opening up the kimono a little bit to people that aren't necessarily your subscribers, it's a little unfair, but I have to ask you anyway, based on your view, what other investment could be a hidden gem?
Yeah, I'll tell you very simply. In my personal portfolio today, it's dominated by two positions. I own an enormous amount, for me, of stock in Philip Morris. I think that's one of the greatest consumer products businesses of all time. Most people don't know that Philip Morris invented light beer, and even with the entire government on their back, they have still increased their dividend every year for all time. They didn't cut their dividend during the Great Depression. They're just an amazing business. They understand what human beings want, and they give it to them good and hard. And in my opinion, you're either gonna you can either pay the tax of nicotine your whole life, or you can collect the dividends of nicotine your whole life. So I'm a big fan, an advocate of Philip Morris shares. I'm also a big fan of the property and casualty insurance businesses. And there's a new property and casualty insurance company called Kinsale, and it was developed by some very experienced property and casualty insurance people. And for a variety of reasons, I believe it's going to be the best performing property and casualty insurance stock for the next 20 years. So that's a really, really very simple way to protect yourself from inflation and to earn equity-like returns in just two stocks. And those stocks, by the way, are going to produce a beta that's about half of the market's volatility, and they're going to give you a return that will easily outperform the S&P 500 for the next decade.
And we have a lot of new people.
You're welcome. Today. You're welcome, everybody. Everyone says that can't be done. Everyone says you can't have low volatility and market-beating results, but they've never heard of Philip Morris, because Philip Morris has been doing it for 100 years.
Wow. No, those were very helpful. And I am going to have a close from my perspective in about 1 or 2 more minutes. And I know we have a lot of new people live and others that will hear this that are newer to me, that I do have some closing comments and opportunities to engage that many of you haven't heard. But out of respect, of course, for my wonderful guest, and we appreciate him being open, honest, and direct. Again, it's not a matter of being likable. You don't have to agree with everything. What happened when we could have honest?
No one's ever accused me of being likable. That's for sure.
I kind of get accused of that as well. What's a little sad, Porter, I get accused of that by my wife.
Yeah.
But I've been married for a long time, for 28 years. So hopefully I'm doing something right. But why don't I give you a chance, for those that are shockingly not as familiar with your work, a little bit of a closing comment and how people could learn more about your services, subscriptions, and what you do.
Well, it's really not hard to find. If you Google me, you'll find my research company. It's called Porter and Company. And you can also just sign up if you want to just get to know me a little bit. You can read a free daily e-letter that I write. It's portersdailyjournal.com, portersdailyjournal.com. Not hard to find. And, we sell some incredibly valuable research for peanuts. I should really raise my prices, but we'll give you everything you need for about $1,000 a year. And that's a lot cheaper than your advisors are charging you, I bet.
I think with some of your insight that you gave our audience today, you were absolutely not kidding on that. I mean, I tell people maybe 99% of what I say is not going to be valuable to you, but if you listen enough to it, even on 2x speed, one great idea that you act on is going to be so exponential to either a hedge, to either an idea or opportunity, or sometimes directly investing, that I'd like to hope could be very valuable. If you don't mind, Porter, one more time, where could people go and how could they learn more?
Sure. The easiest way is just go to Porter's Daily Journal. That's my name, Porter. So, Porters, portersdailyjournal.com. You can also just Google Porter Stansberry and you'll find my research company online.
Excellent. And if you don't mind, Porter, I'll try to do a wrap in about 2 or 3 minutes. Then you had enough of me. We got the election coming up, lots going on. And I do look forward to hopefully having you on at a point in the future, maybe first or second quarter. Again, like I stated, a lot of new viewers and listeners, I appreciate you. My name is Angelo Robles. I've been active in the family office world for a long, long time, most known as being the founder and longtime chairman of Family Office Association. Sold it. Moderately active investor in my own right, and active with my private club for family offices called SFO Continuity. I do some level of consulting, but I do love long form interviews, a little bit like Porter, where I probably share, honestly, more than I probably should, but I enjoy giving back. So many of you could go to simply my name, angelorobles.com, and learn more. And for the real insight at interactivity in person, private masterclasses, a variety of things, simply join SFO Continuity. It's all on the website. You can't miss it. And I'm extremely active across all social media platforms and have one of the greatest handles ever in the family office world. Got it years ago because I'm old, at Family Office, especially on X, where I'm not as active, but on YouTube. A little bit on my final comment. One, this has been a interesting time politically in this country and really around the world. We're 1 day away as we're recording this live and recording it on 11/4 in the afternoon, and tomorrow's election day. Like many of you, we may have imperfect candidates. I agree with that. And we're at the stage now where all of us, including mistakes that I made, we're anchoring in and not opening up our mind to listen to other sides and perspectives. I remember a time when we used to do that, and it might not have even been, when did this change? Maybe 10 or 12 years ago. I'm an imperfect person. I am wrong. Like I said, and I'm not trying to be funny with it, I'm perhaps, my wife will tell you, not always likable, kind of unlikable. The challenge that I have with the family office world is it's very vanilla, very down the middle. There is practically zero original thinking. I put myself out there. I hope to see around corners. If I'm right 51% of the time and wrong 49%, well, it depends. That may end up being of value to you. Get 1 or 2 good ideas, cause you to think for yourself. That's really what I hope to do. I'm never going to be the most popular person in the family office world. There's about 5-10 people that are way more popular. I want to provide to you a certain kind of guest, insight, challenge ideas, and give you And I got deep experiences traveling the world, creating family offices, restructuring them, understanding best practices. And I am the biggest devotee of Jim Collins and Peter Drucker that you'll ever find. My real love is productivity among significant families and their family offices, but I do happen to love investing as well. So one, I want to thank Porter again for being a guest. I look forward to having a very active end of the year. Go and subscribe to Porter if you don't already. What's wrong with you? I think it's an incredible deal. And he gave some great insight that you didn't have to do. So hopefully you see the value of that. And from my perspective, go to angelorobles.com. I want you to join. I want you to be a part of my private club and get the value in my obsession. I am passionate and I am obsessed with what I do. And I hope that shines through, even if it is sometimes a little loud and over the top for some of you. I really appreciate all of you. Thank you, all of the supporters. Again, I'm Angelo Robles on behalf of Porter Stansberry. Have a great day. Thank you all so much.